A total of 72 schools across our region have been redrawing their future today after the government pulled the plug on their new building plans. A further 16 schools have been told their renovation projects are on hold pending a review. Tonight I'll be speaking to Ed Balls, the architect of Labour's ambitious rebuilding programme. But let's start with this report from our political correspondent Andrew Sinclair.
This was a scheme which promised so much to overcrowded and crumbling schools. The Alderman Blaxil in Colchester was due to close in a few years' time as part of a major overhaul of schools in the area. Now, with the funding withdrawn, that's all in doubt.
For those young people that are wishing to learn and are currently learning in those unrefurbished school buildings, they've lost the opportunity to work in fit-for-purpose modern buildings.
3, 2, 1, go!
In Colchester today, the man who was responsible for the Building Schools for the Future programme, doing a bit of his own building as he visited a primary school. The former Education Secretary said closing down the scheme was a dark day for education. But the MP whose constituency he was in disagrees.
Buildings are not what a school's about. It's the head teacher, the teachers, the support staff, the ethos, the culture. And that's what a good school is.
The government says that at a time when interest on the national debt is more than the entire school's budget, this scheme is a waste of money. So just about any project where building hasn't yet started has been stopped. Like here in Bedford, where 12 schools were due to be refurbished. The local MP is unrepentant.
Well, the Building Schools for the Future programme was a bureaucratic nightmare, extremely costly as a programme to implement, and it resulted in very few schools being built.
But across the region, many who work in education are angry. The government hopes that some of the council projects will be taken on by the private sector. It's also set up a review to see if there's a more efficient way to fund school building. But all of this will take time, and schools which were so close to being refurbished are going to have to wait longer. Andrew Sinclair, BBC Look East in Colchester.
Well, just about every major town and city in this region has been affected by the government decision about the school building programme. To gauge the impact on communities, our chief reporter Kim Riley has been to the city of Peterborough.
Serving a growing population in the southeast of the city, Stanground College is an unlovely collection of buildings dating originally from the 1960s. It doesn't have a best side, whichever way you look at it. It's tired, dated and high maintenance, costs a fortune to heat in winter, gets unbearably hot in summer.
What we've got here is 2 blocks which enable the building to be impressive and interesting but not brash architecturally.
A £40 million rebuild was going to open a new era, allowing student numbers to rise to 1,800. Today, that new beginning looks a long way off. Along the maze of corridors to a food technology class. Reaction from 12-year-olds Season and Ellis.
Well, I'm quite disappointed about the new school that we're not going to have it, because other schools have got new schools, but we've just still got the old one.
Were you quite excited at the idea?
Yeah, because I think it'll be a nice change. The school has been here a really long time. My mum and my dad came here, so I think it'd be nice seeing the school new and different things in the school.
Older children told me their high hopes appeared to have been dashed.
We feel kind of not the best, we want to try and make the school the best we can, and at the minute it doesn't feel like that because it's not going to have any money to get rebuilt.
I was looking forward to having a new school for when I'd be in sixth form, so thinking that might not happen, just oh dear.
It's an absolute disaster for the people of South East Peterborough. We've waited for a very long time to have this new build. It would mean so much to us in terms of being able to deliver truly 21st century education to our young people. This really puts the brakes on.
A just completed £400,000 sports centre shows what can be done. There's plenty of space here for a new college. The only hope that a leaner, fitter redevelopment programme will keep the dream alive. Kim Riley, BBC Look East, Peterborough.
As you've seen, Ed Balls, the Shadow Education Secretary, has been in the region today. Late this afternoon, I asked him if it was inevitable the building programme was going to be scrapped, as we just couldn't afford it.
All the money was there. We made the commitments, we made the promises. I'd agreed with the Treasury that these 700 schools would go ahead. That was a Labour promise. It is the Conservatives and the Liberals who have now decided it is not their priority. It's a hammer blow for children, for schools right across the region, right across the country. I think economically It is ridiculous to be stopping new schools and laying off hundreds of thousands of private sector jobs at this time. But this allegation that the money wasn't there is untrue. Labour would have delivered. It is the Conservative Liberal coalition which is now making these cuts.
I'm sure you, as former Education Secretary, intended to deliver, but basically we all know that massive cuts were going to have to be made by Labour, Conservatives or Liberal Democrats, and this money wasn't ring-fenced. You admitted that yourself back in January.
Look, in our manifesto we said we would keep all our promises on building schools for the future. I had agreed that in terms with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Alistair Darling, and the Permanent Secretary of the Department for Education last night confirmed those agreements had been made. The money was there. We would have delivered because this was a priority for us.
But wasn't one of the major problems with this that it was too bureaucratic and much more expensive than it actually needed to be?
That is just an excuse from a Conservative Education Secretary who is announcing the end of the programme. What we were talking about here was a transformation, a once-in-a-generation chance to change our secondary schools. We had to do that to make sure we had the schools in the right place. We had schools for children with disabilities, vocational learning. There's no doubt in the early period, in the middle of the decade, it took too long. We had to get it right. But the National Audit Office said a year ago the programme was value for money, it was on track, there have been real improvements. This is not about bureaucracy. This is about 700 schools where the children and the parents and the governors were told, you've got a new school coming in, now being told, I'm sorry, you're not a priority, you're not worth the investment, it's being cut. That is the reality, and all these excuses from Michael Gove and from the Liberal Democrats cannot disguise the hammer blow nature of the decision they've made.
But we are talking about billions of pounds here. Isn't it better to cut projects that haven't started than take that money out of teachers and their resources?
Well, look, Michael Gove and the Liberal Democrats are also planning 10 to 20% cuts in teachers' budgets, in school budgets, on top of this decision. I made a pledge. I talked about it on your programme before the election. Education would rise under Labour. It's been cut under the Conservatives and the Liberals. But you're talking here about projects which have been planned for a couple of years. Millions of pounds have been spent. The architect's work has been done. All the consultations happened. The children are expecting their new school. And at the last minute, the new school's taken away. And look at the building behind me here. Some of these buildings are old. They're decrepit. They need to be changed. Labour was delivering that, which was good for children and good for the economy and for jobs. And it's now been cut and taken away. It's not fair, and it's economically very, very foolish to be doing this now.
But where was all the money going to come from? We all know there's a huge deficit. We know the cuts have to be found somewhere. So all this spending that you were going to do, where was it going to come from?
Look, of course we've got to get the deficit down, but you should do it in a steady way. We know what happened in the 1980s, actually in the Great Depression of the 1930s, when governments cut investment and public spending really hard, and it actually led to higher unemployment, bigger deficits and slower growth. The idea that it is inevitable, as the Conservatives and Liberals say, you must cut on this scale now, is untrue, it's unwise. The government is spending this year billions and billions of pounds, over £300 billion, but they're not going to be spending on 700 new schools because they've decided that's not a priority. And my point is that for children, for parents, teachers watching your programme, that's really unfair. And for people who are working in the construction industry and for people who care about the future of our economy, it's very, very unwise.
Ed Balls, thank you very much.
Thank you.